My son handed me my own house deed wrapped in Christmas paper. The gift bag looked harmless: red tissue, a cheap bow, the kind you reuse. But when I slid my fingers under the tissue, I didn't touch a sweater or a photo album. I touched crisp legal paper. The corners were sharp enough to cut through the holiday cheer. "Just something to help with your estate planning, Mom. For your future," he said, smiling too quickly. I was 72. I'd been living alone since Robert passed, and I'd let my son help me in small, reasonable ways, organizing my files, keeping an extra set of keys, checking my accounts for emergencies. None of it had felt like surrender until that moment. Because the document at the top didn't have a greeting. It had my address, my parcel number, words like transfer and grantor. It was my home, reduced to a page that could move from my hands to his with a signature. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse him across the living room. I just held the bag on my lap and listened to the paper whisper when I breathed. Weeks later, at the will reading, the attorney opened that same bag and went silent. My son stared at the carpet like it could save him. The lawyer's silence would haunt us all. And sitting there in my own house, with my deed dressed up like a present, I understood one thing too late. I should have known gifts aren't always kindness. It started 3 years earlier, when David lost his job at the manufacturing plant. He'd been there 22 years. 2 weeks before Christmas, they cut him loose anyway. I still remembered the phone call, his breath coming shallow, pride grinding against panic, as he told me the severance would only cover a little while. Their mortgage on that 4-bedroom colonial was about $2,300 a month. And Jennifer had just had their second baby. They were stretched thin in a way I could hear in his silence between sentences. "Mom," he said, and his voice tightened like a knot. "Could we stay with you for a few weeks, just until I get back on my feet?" Of course I said yes. What mother wouldn't? Robert had left me this house free and clear, and most days I rattled around inside it like a penny in a jar. The guest rooms had been empty since David moved out 15 years ago. I thought family noise might soften the quiet that had lived here since Robert's funeral. If you're listening because you're caring for a parent, or because you are the parent, save this story in your mind. What happened to me didn't start with a crime. It started with kindness. Jennifer's reaction should have warned me. That December afternoon, she stood in my kitchen with the newborn on her hip, eyes moving over my old wallpaper and tired appliances like she was pricing them for a sale. Her fingers drummed a quick, impatient rhythm on the Formica counter Robert and I installed in 1987. I caught a whisper to David, something about temporary arrangements and better options. Then her smile snapped back into place, as if I'd imagined it. David, though, seemed grateful. And I'd missed having purpose in someone else's life. For the first few months, it almost felt like the old days. Him asking about interviews, me rocking the baby while Jennifer ran errands. They paid me $300 a month for rent, which barely covered the utility jump, but I told myself I wasn't doing it for money. I told myself it was family. "Mom, we need to talk about your future." By the 6-month mark, the air in my own home felt different. Jennifer began to have opinions about how I should run the place. Cabinets moved, labels appeared. My pantry looked like a stranger's idea of my life. She called it helping me organize, the way people call a lock for your safety. David changed too, subtly at first. He started using phrases he hadn't used as a teenager. Smart money moves. Protecting your assets. Estate management. When I asked what he meant, he'd wave it off with a promise we'd sit down and go through everything later. But later never came. Instead, he brought home documents. He'd set them on my table with the casual confidence of someone placing a menu in front of me. I could hear the paper slide against wood. I could smell toner from fresh printing. "Just initial here, Mom," he'd say. "Routine updates, nothing complicated." After the third or fourth time, I started reading more carefully. Most of it looked legitimate: insurance wording, account language, dense paragraphs that made my eyes ache. When I asked him to explain a clause, he'd get that faintly impatient look like I was a child dragging my feet. "Trust me, Mom," he'd say, soft and steady. "I wouldn't let anyone take advantage of you." The papers felt heavier than gift wrap. That summer, Jennifer announced they'd found a house they wanted to buy. Bigger, newer, right for the kids. David had landed a job at a smaller company, and they swore the payments would be fine. They only needed help with the down payment. "It's an investment in our family's future," Jennifer said, and then added, almost as an afterthought, "and yours too. The kids will have a proper home to bring their grandmother to visit." I loaned them $15,000 for my savings, money Robert had wanted me to have for safety, not generosity. David insisted on writing formal loan paperwork for tax purposes. The documents looked professional, and that should have comforted me. Instead, it made my stomach go tight, because professional papers don't always protect the person who signs them. When I suggested my attorney glance at it, David looked hurt, as if I'd accused him of something ugly. "Come on, Mom, this is family business," he said. "We don't need lawyers complicating things." Against my better judgment, I signed. They moved out 2 weeks later, and the house went quiet again. Too quiet. But David still stopped by, often with more updates, banking changes, insurance beneficiaries, power of attorney tweaks for emergencies. "You need to think ahead," he told me. "What if something happens to you? What if you can't make decisions for yourself anymore?" By the second year, his visits came with checklists, bills they needed me to cover because they were temporarily short, errands that required my car, babysitting that stretched into overnight stays because Jennifer had plans she couldn't or wouldn't change. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I began to feel like hired help in my own life. Expected to provide, expected to comply, but never trusted with the full picture. When I asked about the loan payments that never appeared, David's voice would turn gently corrective. "Mom, we already talked about this. The structure is more complicated than monthly payments. Don't worry about the details." Then one afternoon, my bank called with a polite question about a transfer I didn't recognize. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make my stomach drop. When I brought it up, David blinked like I'd accused the wrong man. "Oh, that's probably just the new system I set up for you," he said. "Remember? We talked about streamlining things." I didn't remember. And lately, I'd been questioning my memory more and more, because David and Jennifer had started doing it for me. They'd mention my forgetfulness, little laughs that weren't jokes, small agreements I supposedly made, decisions I couldn't recall. "Mom," David would say, patient as a stranger, "you told me last week you wanted me to handle more of this. Don't you remember?" And slowly, quietly, I understood the role they were writing for me. I was becoming the hired help in my own life. That Christmas morning, I'd expected the usual gifts. Something soft, something safe, a sweater in a color I didn't wear, a book I already owned. David and Jennifer arrived around 9 with the children, an armload of wrapped packages, and a kind of bright cheer that always felt a little too tight on their faces. I cooked the same breakfast Robert and I had made for 30 years. Bacon, eggs, cinnamon toast, comfort food meant to keep traditions stitched together. We gathered around the tree, the children vibrating with excitement as paper tore and bows flew. "This one's special, Mom," David said. "Jennifer and I put a lot of thought into it." He handed me a gift bag. It was heavier than it looked, wrapped in expensive paper that crinkled crisp and slow, nothing like the thin dollar store rolls I kept in the hall closet. I slid my fingers through tissue paper and touched something firm. Inside was a leather portfolio with my name embossed in gold. Elegant, thoughtful, the kind of gift designed to make an older woman feel cherished and foolish for ever doubting her son. But when I opened it, the warmth drained out of the room. The first page was a quitclaim deed, county header, legal description, my address, 247 Maple Lane, printed as plainly as a label on a box. At the bottom was my signature, neat and confident, transferring full ownership of my home to David Michael Patterson. Except I had never signed it. I had never signed anything like that on any date in any room for any reason. I had never agreed to give away the house Robert and I spent decades paying off, the house I'd kept alive after he died by doing everything alone. Repairs, taxes, insurance, the small humiliations of aging that you don't tell anyone about. "It's just paperwork, Mom," David said quickly, before I could find my voice. "Estate planning stuff, like we talked about. This way, if something happens to you, there won't be legal complications for the family." His tone was the same patient voice he'd used for months. But now I heard what lived underneath it. Calculation, timing, the careful push of someone trying to get you to swallow something before you taste it. I stared at the signature. It looked almost right, which was what made it terrifying. The shape of the letters was close enough to be believable, but something about it didn't breathe the way my handwriting did. My arthritis made certain strokes wobble. This signature didn't wobble at all. It was too tidy, too practiced. "When exactly did we discuss this?" I asked, because I don't remember agreeing to transfer my house to anyone. Jennifer shifted in her chair and suddenly became very interested in helping the children with their toys. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees, wearing the expression he used with difficult customers back when he worked sales. Calm on the surface, pressure underneath. "Mom," he said softly, "you've been having some memory issues lately. We've all noticed it." My stomach tightened. It was one thing to be treated like an inconvenience. It was another thing to be treated like an unreliable witness to your own life. He kept going, building the story, while I sat there holding paper that could erase me. "Last month you forgot dinner plans twice," he said. "And you couldn't remember that conversation with Jennifer about updating your will? This deed is just a precaution. It protects your assets from taxes and legal messes." I did remember those dinners. I'd canceled them both times because David called with the last-minute emergencies that needed money, just until Friday. And I had never had any conversation with Jennifer about my will. If I'd discussed something that serious, it would have landed in my body like a stone. I would have carried it. I looked down at my house key in my palm. The metal felt suddenly unfamiliar, as if it belonged to someone else. My house key suddenly felt foreign in my hand. The room went quiet except for the children's plastic toys clicking and singing. David reached for his briefcase and snapped it open. The sound was sharp, like a latch on a courtroom door. He slid out another page and held it up as if it were reassurance. A notary acknowledgement, a stamp, a commission number, a tidy rectangle of official authority. "The notary was very accommodating," David said. "We got it done fast. December 10th was the latest we could file before the end of the tax year. Lucky timing, really." I studied the acknowledgement. According to that page, I had appeared before a notary, presented my driver's license, and signed willingly, without coercion. But December 10th wasn't a blur in my calendar. It was a day with edges. On December 10th, I'd been at Dr. Morrison's office for my quarterly blood pressure check. I'd scheduled it months in advance. I still had the little printed receipt for my copay tucked into my purse. Because I kept things like that. It was how I'd survived widowhood, by keeping records when no one else was watching out for me. "David," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I was at the doctor's office on December 10th. I have the receipt if you want to see it. So I couldn't have signed anything with a notary that afternoon." He glanced at Jennifer. The look lasted half a second. Husband to wife, silent and fluent. Then David smiled. "Mom, you're getting confused again," he said gently. "The notary meeting was in the morning, around 11. He added details the way liars do. Confident, quick, almost generous. Right before your lunch with Mrs. Henderson." Mrs. Henderson had moved into assisted living months earlier. I hadn't had lunch with her in half a year. David didn't know that, because David wasn't listening to my life anymore. He was using it. The children kept playing. The tree lights blinked. The room looked festive, and my body felt like it was standing in cold water. David leaned closer and slid a pen into my line of sight. Black, heavy, expensive. I recognized it instantly. A Mont Blanc Robert had given him when he graduated law school 15 years ago. Funny how I could remember that detail perfectly while my son insisted my mind was falling apart. "Just sign here, Mom. Trust me on this." I didn't take the pen. "I'm not signing anything else," I said. "Not until I understand what's happening." I lifted the deed and tapped the bottom portion with my fingernail. "This says I'm transferring my house to you for $10. $10, David. That isn't estate planning. That's theft." The word hung in the air like smoke. Jennifer stopped pretending to supervise the children. Her eyes were fixed on me now, sharp, hungry, offended, as if I'd insulted her personally by refusing to disappear. David's smile drained away. For the first time in months, I saw something on his face that didn't belong to my son at all. Coldness, desperation, the look of someone realizing the easy path might be closing. "Don't be dramatic," he said. "This keeps the house in the family. It protects it from estate taxes and creditors. If you die tomorrow, probate could tie everything up for months. This avoids that." "And if I live for another 20 years?" I asked. "What happens to me then? Do I become a tenant in my own house? Do I pay rent to you for sleeping in a bedroom your father and I shared for decades?" He shifted, and for a moment he had no script. "We'll work something out," he said finally. "A life estate arrangement, maybe. You'll always have a place here." A place here, not ownership, not control, not safety. A place as if I were a visitor. I set the deed down carefully, like it could break and cut someone. "I need time," I said, "and I want my attorney to review this before I sign anything else." David's eyes sharpened. "There isn't time for that. The notary is only available through tomorrow. If we don't get it filed before December 31st, we lose the tax advantages for the year." It was the same trick he'd been using for months. Artificial urgency, tight deadlines, paper in front of me, questions discouraged, signatures treated like chores. Only now the stakes weren't $15,000 or an account update. Now the stake was my home. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry in front of the children. I simply closed the leather portfolio and held it against my chest, as if I were keeping my house from sliding off the table. David snapped his briefcase shut with practiced irritation. Jennifer began gathering the children's toys with unnecessary force. They left before noon, their cheer gone, the air behind them stripped down to something bare and honest. I spent the rest of Christmas Day at my kitchen table with the portfolio open, reading the deed again and again. The words didn't change, but I did. Each time my eyes landed on that tidy signature, something inside me hardened. This wasn't estate planning. This was a theft attempt, gift-wrapped, timed for a holiday, presented when I was supposed to be sentimental and soft. By late afternoon, the winter light stretched across my living room floor, and my house felt contaminated, not by strangers, but by the realization that my son had been rehearsing my disappearance. I went to my drawer and found the little receipt from Dr. Morrison's office. I smoothed it flat. I found the calendar where I'd written the appointment in pen months earlier. I started a small pile, not revenge, not drama, proof. The notary public would see us after New Year's. And as that sentence formed in my mind, his threat, his clock, his next step, I understood something else just as clearly. Christmas morning was the last day I let them tell me what I remembered. That ended Christmas morning. The day after Christmas, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cleared my dining room table the way I used to clear it for Robert's paperwork. One clean surface, one sharp lamp, no distractions. Then I went down to the basement storage closet and pulled out the old binders he kept labeled in block letters. Estate, bank, insurance, tax. The smell that rose from them wasn't nostalgia, it was dust and ink and the quiet comfort of order. Most people didn't know that before I married Robert, and before my life narrowed into being someone's wife and someone's mother. I'd completed 2 years of paralegal training at the community college. I never made it a career, but I learned enough to recognize patterns, and I learned enough to know that a person with a folder and a deadline could do real damage. That oversight was about to cost David dearly. I didn't start by confronting him again. Confrontation was what he wanted. Another chance to tell me I was confused. Another chance to move the goalposts until I doubted my own memory. Instead, I made a decision that felt like stepping out of a room I'd been trapped in. I called Robert's estate attorney. I didn't tell David. I didn't mention it to Jennifer. I didn't even leave a message on a line David might have access to. I used my landline and asked the receptionist to schedule me privately as soon as possible. When the attorney returned my call, his voice was calm, familiar, and suddenly heavy with seriousness the moment I said the words quitclaim deed and notary. "Margaret," he said, "if someone forged your signature to transfer your home, that's not family planning. That's fraud. And if your son has been using power of attorney to move money without your informed consent, that's exploitation." I stared at the leather portfolio on my table while he spoke, and I felt something inside me settle into place. Not rage, not hysteria, a kind of cold clarity. "What do I do first?" I asked. "Don't warn him," he said. "Collect proof. We need a clean chain. Records from the bank, records from the county, and anything in writing where he pressured you. Emails, texts, anything with dates and timestamps. Some gifts require returning to the right hands." Armed with a checklist instead of a theory, I started moving. First, I photographed every document David had given me over the past 3 years. I didn't do it dramatically. I did it methodically, 1 page at a time, the camera clicked soft in the quiet house. Power of attorney updates, insurance beneficiary forms, loan paperwork, banking streamline authorizations. The stack looked harmless until I laid it out to it in chronological order. Then it looked like a staircase leading down. Each form nudged me closer to dependence. Each signature, mine or pretending to be mine, moved control away from my hands and into his. It wasn't one big theft. It was a series of small permissions that added up to a cage. But the deed was different. The deed was bold, clumsy, desperate. It was the kind of document that didn't ask for my cooperation. It assumed it. It assumed I'd fold because it was Christmas and he was my son. That afternoon, I drove to the county recorder's office. It was a gray concrete building that smelled like old paper and industrial disinfectant, the kind of place where nothing personal happened, only facts. A number flashed on a screen. My shoes squeaked on tile. Somewhere behind the counter, a printer kept spitting out sheets with a steady, mechanical sigh. When my turn came, I slid my driver's license across the counter and kept my voice even. "I need to verify the recording status for my property," I said. "I believe someone attempted a transfer." The clerk typed for a moment, her nails clicking like tiny metronomes. She didn't look shocked. People bring their worst days into government offices all the time. She just looked tired and competent. "I'm showing no recent recordings for 247 Maple Lane," she said. "Last transaction was years ago. No quitclaim deeds, no transfers, nothing filed recently." I exhaled so slowly my ribs ached, which meant the deed in my dining room, my house dressed up like a present, had never been recorded. David had presented it to me like a done deal, but legally it wasn't a finished theft. It was an attempt, a lie on paper, waiting for a clerk's stamp to become real. I asked for printed confirmation. She slid it to me, the page warm from the printer. A simple record, but it felt like a door unlocking. I still owned my house, completely, outright. From there, I drove straight to my bank. I'd kept my accounts there for decades. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. A security camera blinked in the corner. The manager ushered me into a small office and closed the door, lowering her voice the way professionals do when they realize the problem isn't customer service. "I need to review activity on my accounts," I said, "and I need to know exactly what authority my son has been using." The manager's expression didn't change much, but her eyes sharpened. She pulled up the accounts, scrolled, then stopped scrolling. "What I'm seeing," she said carefully, "is a pattern." Statements printed, pages stacked, a highlighter appeared. She didn't just tell me numbers, she showed me lines with dates and times, transfers that started small and grew bolder, automatic payments I didn't recognize, withdrawals that happened without me standing at the counter. "These transactions show authorization through a power of attorney designation," she said. "But the frequency and the escalation, this should have triggered additional review." "I want copies of everything," I told her. "Account histories, authorization forms, any changes to access, and I want his access revoked immediately." She nodded once, the way people nod when they are stepping into procedure. "We'll flag your accounts for additional security," she said. "New passwords, verbal passphrases, alerts for every transfer. And we can document that you're disputing these activities." I left the bank with a thick envelope that felt heavier than any gift bag, not because of the paper's weight, but because of what it proved. That night, I did something else, something David never expected. I opened my email. I searched his name, Jennifer's name, words like streamline, update, paperwork, POA, beneficiary. The screen filled with messages that sounded so reasonable when you skimmed them quickly, and so controlling when you read them slowly. "Just need this signed by Friday. Bank says we should update this for your protection. Don't worry about the details." Each one had a date, a time, a trail. Truth has a way of surfacing on paper. By Thursday morning, my dining room looked like a quiet war room. County printouts, bank statements, copies of forms, a written timeline in my own handwriting. I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't confused. I had a chronology, but evidence wasn't enough. David could still do what he always did: smile softly, claim it was all for my benefit, imply I was forgetting. I needed a setting where he couldn't rewrite reality. That's when I remembered Robert's estate meeting. Robert had been gone 18 months, but the estate wasn't fully closed. Business valuations, final accounting, the slow work that doesn't care about grief. David knew there was a settlement meeting scheduled for the second week of January. He'd mentioned it more than once, always a little too interested in the date. What he didn't know, because he'd never read the documents carefully, was that Robert had named me executor with discretionary authority, and Robert had written protections into his plan. The kind of language that doesn't make noise until it has to. When I called the attorney again and told him what I'd collected, county confirmation, bank records, email trail, his voice turned from concerned to surgical. "Here's what we do," he said. "We use the settlement meeting." I held the phone tight against my ear, listening as he laid out the strategy. "Bring the deed," he said. "Let David try to use it. Let him present it as a gift or estate planning. I'll examine it in front of witnesses. Once he commits to that story, he can't walk it back. And after that, we revoke his power of attorney and lock down your title protections immediately." I swallowed, not because I was afraid of him, but because I was finally accepting the truth. This would end something. "Are you prepared for your relationship with your son to change permanently?" the attorney asked. "Once you expose him, there may be no going back." I looked at the neat signature on that deed, the signature that was almost mine and not mine at all. I thought of the way David had said, "Trust me," while trying to remove my house from my hands. My relationship with my son ended the moment he decided to steal my home, I said. The meeting just makes it official. There was a pause, brief, satisfied, professional. "Then we do it properly," he said. "Bring every document, and don't warn him." I set the phone down and touched the leather portfolio like it was evidence in a trial. Let him bring the gift to the meeting. The second Tuesday in January arrived with a kind of bone-deep cold that made my 72-year-old joints ache before I even touched the doorknob. I dressed carefully anyway. Navy suit, simple pearl earrings, the sensible shoes Robert used to tease me about. Until the day he admitted they made me look like a woman people listened to. If I was going to sit across from my son while a lawyer examined the paper he'd tried to use to erase me, I wanted to look like someone whose word carried weight. Robert's estate attorney's office sat on the third floor of a granite building downtown. Old money architecture, clean lines, and a lobby so quiet you could hear the hum of the lights. The elevator smelled faintly of metal and winter coats. When the doors opened, the hallway carpet softened my footsteps the way a church aisle does. I arrived 15 minutes early, leather handbag on one arm, a manila folder in the other. Inside were copies of every document David had pushed across my table over the past 3 years. Updates, forms, routine changes. And tucked beneath them, wrapped in a plain grocery bag so no one could mistake it for a gift, was the leather portfolio from Christmas morning. The attorney met me at the door to the conference room. "Margaret," he said quietly, closing the door behind us, "are you ready? Once we begin, there's no going back. David will either accept responsibility, or he'll deny it and force us into formal action." I looked at the long wooden table, the neat stacks of estate papers waiting at the head like silent witnesses. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, steady, not panicked. The kind of fear that comes with stepping onto solid ground after years of slipping. "I'm ready," I said. "I've been ready since Christmas morning when I realized my son tried to steal my home while I was still living in it." The attorney nodded once, not comfort, not pity, professional acknowledgement. He arranged the room the way careful people arrange truth. A chair for him at the head of the table. A chair for me along one side where I could see the door. 2 chairs across from me, close enough that I could hear every breath, every paper shift, every lie. The estate documents sat in front of him in tidy stacks. A legal pad, a fountain pen, a small desk lamp angled toward the center of the table like a spotlight. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened. David walked in wearing the charcoal suit he wore when he wanted to look trustworthy. His hair was neatly combed. His smile was warmed up and waiting. He carried a slim briefcase tucked under his arm like an accessory to confidence. I saw the Mont Blanc pen in his hand, Robert's gift from years ago, rolling between his fingers as if it belonged to him by right. Jennifer came behind him, a black dress and a small notebook in her hand, the kind of notebook you bring when you think you're about to write down numbers that will change your life. "Good morning, Mom," David said, stepping close enough to kiss my cheek. The kiss was quick, practiced, and oddly familiar. The same performance he'd given me on Christmas morning when he'd handed me paper that could make me homeless. "I'm glad you came," he added, voice thick with staged warmth. Dad would have wanted the whole family present for this. I didn't argue. I didn't correct him. I simply sat and watched him take his chair like a man arriving to collect what he believed was owed. The attorney greeted them politely, neutral as a judge. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Before we begin the final settlement review, I understand there may be developments that could affect how certain distributions are handled." David brightened immediately. It was subtle, just a lift at the corners of his mouth, a posture that loosened like he'd heard good news. "Yes," David said. "Actually, there are. Mom and I have been doing some estate planning, family financial planning, simplifying things." Jennifer smiled and squeezed his hand, proud and confident, as if she were watching him win something. David reached into his briefcase and drew out the leather portfolio. My name was still embossed in gold. Even across the table, I could see it glint under the conference room light like a joke with sharp edges. He slid it across the wood toward the attorney, the way you slide a signed contract when you believe the deal is done. "She's decided to transfer her house to me," David said smoothly. "Part of a comprehensive strategy, keeps everything in the family, avoids complications later." The attorney didn't react the way David expected. He didn't congratulate him. He didn't smile. He didn't reach for the portfolio with eager interest. He reached for it with care, slow, deliberate, like a surgeon lifting something fragile or dangerous. The attorney's briefcase clicked like a courthouse door. "Before we proceed," he said, "I want to be very clear about what I'm being asked to review. David, you're telling me your mother has already executed a property transfer?" "Yes," David said, leaning back in his chair with the relief of a man who thinks the hardest part is over. "Through a quitclaim deed, signed December 10th, properly notarized, it gives me full ownership of the property." Jennifer's pen scratched once on her notebook. A quiet, confident line. The attorney opened the portfolio and lifted the first page. Paper made that soft whisper as it moved, thin, official, indifferent. The attorney's eyes tracked across the text. His finger traced the lines the way professionals do when they're not reading for story, but for structure. Seconds stretched. David's confidence filled the room like perfume, too strong, too sure of itself. I watched the attorney's face because my son was watching my silence, and I could feel David waiting for me to falter, waiting for me to look confused, or apologize, or reach for the excuse he'd built for me. Memory issues, misunderstanding, mother being dramatic. Instead, I sat very still. "I see," the attorney said finally, voice flat. He turned the deed slightly under the light, scanning the notarization block. His thumb paused near the seal. His gaze returned to the signature line. Then he stopped. Not the kind of stop where someone is thinking, the kind where something has changed. "Interesting," he said, and for the first time David's shoulders tightened, just a fraction. "Let me examine this more carefully." David smiled anyway, mistaking caution for admiration. "Of course," David said. "It's all very straightforward." The attorney didn't answer. He reached into a drawer beside him and pulled out a magnifying glass. Small, old-fashioned, the kind that makes you think of wills and wars and documents that survive people. He brought the glass to the page and studied the signature. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear Jennifer's pen stop. I could hear the fluorescent light hum overhead like tension. The attorney lowered the magnifying glass, then glanced at me. "Margaret," he said gently, "could you sign your name on my legal pad, just as you normally would?" My stomach tightened, not with fear of him, but with the weight of the moment. In my house, David always controlled the pen. Here the pen was being offered to me like a tool. I took it and signed. Carefully, naturally, the way my hand did now. My M wobbled slightly. The tail of my last name thinned where arthritis and age made endurance expensive. The attorney placed my fresh signature beside the deed, aligning the pages with a precision that felt almost ceremonial. He brought the magnifying glass down again and compared stroke to stroke. David's smile began to look fixed. "David," the attorney said, voice still calm, "did you witness your mother signing this deed?" "Yes," David said quickly, too quickly. "I drove her to the notary. She was happy to do it." The attorney didn't argue. He didn't accuse. He simply moved his finger to the notarization seal. He ran his fingertip over it, slowly, as if feeling for something that should exist. Then he did it again, pressing a little more firmly. I knew what he was checking before he said it, because I'd learned to love paper in a practical way. Embossed seals leave impressions. They leave proof you can touch. The attorney's eyes lifted from the page to David's face. "This seal," he said quietly, "doesn't have an impression." David blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," the attorney said, still calm, "a real notary seal is embossed. You can feel it. It leaves a raised imprint in the paper. This one appears printed, like an image." Jennifer's notebook slid slightly under her palm, a small sound, but sharp in the silence. David's mouth opened, then closed. His fingers tightened around his Mont Blanc pen until the knuckles paled. "There must be," David began, voice losing its smoothness. "There must be some mistake. Maybe you're just—" But the attorney had already gone still again, eyes back on the page, magnifying glass hovering like a judgment. In that moment, I saw my son realize something he hadn't calculated. This room wasn't my kitchen table. This man wasn't me. And paper didn't care about family. The silence stretched like a courtroom verdict. Bill had finished his slow inspection, and the silence he left behind felt less like hesitation and more like a judge deciding when to speak. He set the deed down in the center of the conference table. Then he laid my fresh signature beside it. Same name, 2 different lives. David's Mont Blanc pen clicked once, then stopped. "David," Bill said, voice level, "you brought this document into a legal settlement meeting and asked me to treat it as legitimate estate planning." David lifted his chin. "Because it is." Bill slid the notarization page forward. "This is a quitclaim deed, claiming your mother voluntarily transferred her home to you." He didn't look at me when he said, "your mother." He looked directly at David. "Margaret," Bill asked, "did you sign any deed transferring 247 Maple Lane to David on December 10th or on any date in December?" "No," I said. The word came out clean, almost calm. "I never signed a deed. I never met a notary. And I never agreed to give away my house." Across from me, Jennifer's pen froze over her notebook. David's face tightened. "Mom, we talked about this. You wanted to simplify things." Bill didn't argue. He simply placed my signature comparison in front of David. "Here is Margaret's signature today," he said, "and here is the signature on this deed." David swallowed. "That's subjective." Bill's tone stayed gentle. "It's not subjective when you line up multiple examples. Margaret's signature changed over the last few years. The deed signature matches an older version of her handwriting." Jennifer stared at the paper as if it had teeth. Bill tapped the notary section. "Now the notarization." David, you said the notary was Sandra Williams. Yes, David said quickly. She met Mom. She verified her ID. She notarized it. Everything was proper. Bill's phone was already in his hand. I called her while you were explaining your timeline. She has no record of meeting your mother, and she wasn't even in the state that week. David opened his mouth, then closed it. The pen clicked again, faster this time, like a nervous metronome. Jennifer looked up sharply. David? There must be confusion, David said. Maybe it was a different day, a different... Then there's the seal, Bill said. He ran his thumb over the notary stamp area. A real embossed seal leaves a physical impression. You can feel it. He pushed the page toward me. My fingertips slid across the paper, flat, smooth, no ridges. Bill exhaled, almost sadly. This is printed. The air shifted, not with drama, worse than drama, with reality. David tried his oldest trick. Mom's been having memory issues lately, he said, voice turning soft and concerned. She forgets conversations. She forgets what she agrees to. I watched him do it. I watched the concern perform itself on his face, and I watched it fail. Confusion, Bill said, doesn't create a forged signature and a fake notary acknowledgement. He reached for another sheet, the county recorder's confirmation. Also, this deed was never recorded. There is no transfer on file. If you truly believed this was legitimate and time-sensitive, you would have recorded it immediately. David's eyes darted to Jennifer. Their quick glance was the only honest thing left between them. We were going to record it after the holidays, he said. Bill stacked the papers with methodical care, like he was building a wall between me and my son. David, he said, I'm going to be direct. Presenting a deed like this, especially in a legal proceeding, has serious consequences. David's jaw clenched. This is family. We can handle this privately. I surprised myself by laughing, quietly, without humor. You wrapped it in Christmas paper, I said. That was your version of private. Jennifer's eyes flicked to me, then back to David, as if she were seeing the Christmas morning again with a new lens. Bill turned one page in my folder. We're not done. Margaret asked me to review her financial records because this deed didn't appear out of nowhere. I slid the bank statements across the table. I'd highlighted them myself, rows of numbers turned into a trail. Jennifer leaned forward, reading. Her brows drew together. Bill spoke plainly. Over the last 18 months, money moved from Margaret's accounts to accounts she doesn't recognize. The transfers increased in size and frequency. David's voice came fast. Those were loans. Mom knew. I knew you asked, I said. I didn't know you took. David's gaze snapped to mine, sharp and warning. The look that used to make me shrink. It didn't move me anymore. Bill pointed to a line item. These were initiated under the authority David had through power of attorney access. Jennifer sat back. Power of attorney? She repeated, like the phrase tasted bitter. David turned to her. It was for emergencies. You know that. Jennifer's voice went smaller but sharper. Did you use it to take money? David's throat worked. We were short. The kids. Don't, Jennifer said. It wasn't loud. It was final. Don't put the kids on the stand for you. Bill held up a folder, thin, official-looking, but it might as well have weighed 100 pounds. Margaret, he said, these are revocation documents. Effective immediately, David's authority under your power of attorney is terminated. He will have no access to your accounts, no ability to sign on your behalf, no ability to move your assets for emergencies. David shoved his chair back slightly. You can't do that without... We can, Bill said, and we are. He placed another packet beside it. We're also filing protective measures around the property. A notice that flags any attempted transfer. plus additional verification steps. If anyone tries to record a deed on Margaret's home, it will be challenged. David's lips parted, then pressed together. For the first time since Robert died, my son looked like a man who had reached the end of his script. Jennifer's hands trembled as she closed her notebook. She stared at the deed again, at the signature, at the flat, printed seal. Then she looked at David, and whatever she saw there made her face harden. "Did you forge her name?" she asked. Bill didn't give him much room. "David, I want to be very clear," he said. "This is not a paperwork mistake. This is not estate planning. This is an attempt to take ownership of your mother's home." He paused, just long enough for the sentence to settle. "This constitutes attempted property theft, sir." At the far end of the table, Robert's sister Elaine, who'd come for the estate settlement, made a small wounded sound and pressed a tissue to her mouth. David's color drained as if someone had opened a valve. He tried weakly to resurrect the story. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. "The money was supposed to be loans. The deed was supposed to protect the house. Mom's been getting confused, and I was trying to keep her from making financial mistakes that could hurt the family." It was the first time he'd said anything that sounded like the truth, and it chilled me more than his lies, because it revealed how he'd decided to think of me, not as a mother, not as a person, just as a problem to manage and a set of assets to control. Bill's reply was quiet. "Concern doesn't justify forgery." Jennifer rose slowly. The chair legs scraped the floor, an ugly, ordinary sound that felt like an ending. His wife wouldn't meet anyone's eyes now. She gathered her purse, her notebook, her pen, the same pen that had been taking notes for their financial planning. Her fingers fumbled once, then steadied. David reached for her wrist. "Jennifer, please, let me explain." She pulled away. "You did," she said. "You explained who you are." Bill stood as well, already in motion. Phone, folders, steps that didn't hesitate. "I'm filing the protections today," he said. "David, you need counsel." David stared at the table, at the stacks of paper he'd carried in, like trophies, and now couldn't touch without leaving fingerprints on his own downfall. I stood slowly, feeling my knees complain and my spine straighten anyway. In my handbag, my keys pressed into my palm, cold metal, familiar shape. The weight of a life I'd built and refused to surrender. My house keys meant something again. The consequences arrived swiftly. 2 weeks after the meeting, a sheriff's deputy served the restraining order at David's workplace, right in the lobby, in front of the reception desk, where people pretended not to look. David later told me they called his name over the intercom like it was a routine appointment. He sounded smaller just saying it. By Monday, an envelope from Human Resources landed in his mailbox. Administrative leave pending investigation. It wasn't the company handbook that made it real. It was the paper, the signature, the date, the way his career suddenly depended on the same kind of documentation he'd tried to use against me. Jennifer moved out that Thursday. I watched from my kitchen window as she loaded boxes into her mother's van. She moved with sharp, controlled anger. No tears, no speeches. Just the clipped efficiency of a woman saving what she could. The children clutched toys and asked questions she couldn't answer without breaking something in them. "Where are we going?" Emily asked. "Just for a little while," Jennifer said too quickly. The same lie David once used on me. David was forced to list their house as an emergency sale. Without Jennifer's income and without my money quietly filling their gaps, the mortgage became a countdown. Legal fees ate whatever savings they'd built. A red banner went up on the for sale sign, "Motivated Seller." Moving trucks don't lie about desperation. I didn't feel joy watching my son's life collapse. What I felt was a vindicated relief, like someone had finally taken their foot off my chest. For 3 years, I'd subsidized his lifestyle while he stole my security one routine update at a time. Now he was meeting the natural consequences of what he'd done. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had spent months planting fear in my mind, nursing home threats, warnings about incompetence, hints that I couldn't manage my own affairs. He'd used those fears to justify theft. Now he was living inside the kind of uncertainty he once tried to hand me as my future. I hadn't orchestrated his downfall. I'd stopped enabling it. The protections Bill put in place made my world quieter in the best way. My bank added a verbal passphrase only I knew. I received alerts for every transfer attempt. I changed my online passwords and then changed them again. I replaced the lock on my mailbox. I moved my filing cabinet keys from the kitchen drawer, where David always seemed to find them, to a small safe I kept by my bed. For the first time in years, I slept without listening for footsteps that didn't belong. Then the phone call came in February. David's voice carried a humility I'd never heard before. No practiced warmth. No, "Mom, you're being dramatic." Just a rawness that sounded like he'd been living with himself and hadn't enjoyed the company. "Mom," he said quietly, "I need to talk about the kids. Jennifer won't let me see them unsupervised, and the restraining order prevents direct contact. But Bill said you might discuss a supervised visitation arrangement." I held the receiver and considered hanging up. For one slow moment, the old mother in me wanted to pretend none of this happened. The new woman in me remembered the deed in a Christmas bag. My grandchildren weren't responsible for their father's crimes. "David," I said, "I'm willing to discuss the children's welfare, but only with Bill present, and only if you understand our relationship has changed permanently. You committed crimes against me. Any contact will be governed by legal agreements, not family obligation." The silence stretched long enough for me to hear him breathe. "I understand," he said at last. "I destroyed our relationship when I tried to take your house. I can't undo the theft or the lies. But Emily and Michael shouldn't lose their grandmother because of what I did." He was right about that. The children were 7 and 4. Too young to understand why their world had exploded into custody schedules and supervised conversations. But my relationship with them would be different now, built around boundaries that kept me safe. Christmas gifts will be simpler from now on. The supervised visitation arrangement Bill negotiated was clinically precise. David could see the children at my house on alternate Saturday afternoons, but only with a court-approved supervisor present. Visits lasted exactly 3 hours. David was prohibited from discussing money, legal matters, or adult family business around the children. More importantly, he would never be alone in my house again. Never have access to my mail, never help with my documents. Never stand over my shoulder with a pen and a deadline. The first supervised visit took place on a rainy Saturday in March. The supervisor arrived first, badge on her belt, clipboard in hand, shoes squeaking slightly on my entryway tile. She introduced herself in a voice practiced for tense rooms. Then David arrived. He carried dollar store toys in a thin plastic bag, a dramatic downturn from the expensive gifts he used to bring to buy goodwill and guilt. His shoulders looked narrower than I remembered, as if the weight he'd been stealing from me had dropped back onto him. Emily hovered behind him, shy and uncertain. Michael ran straight to me with 4-year-old certainty, climbing into my lap like the past could be trusted. They played, they ate the cookies I'd made, they chattered about school with the resilience children bring to broken things. And then the questions came, because children always find the seam. "Why can't Daddy come by himself?" Emily asked, eyeing the supervisor. "Why doesn't Daddy live with Mommy?" Michael asked, as if the answer might be simple. "Why can't we sleep here anymore?" Emily pressed. I answered with age-appropriate honesty, the only kind I had left. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt other people, I said. And then everyone has to learn new ways to be together that keep people safe. David watched me say it. He didn't argue, he didn't correct me. His eyes looked tired in a way that suggested he finally understood what his choices had cost beyond money. Trust, respect, a mother's love. During one visit, Emily asked why everything had changed, why Daddy couldn't help Grandma with paperwork like before, why Sunday dinners felt like a story from another family. Sometimes, sweetheart, I said, people make choices that hurt others, even people they're supposed to protect. When that happens, everyone must learn new ways to be together that prevent hurt from happening again. She looked at me serious. Are you sad? I thought about the house, about Robert, about the deed in the gift bag, about my own signature, real and forged. I'm sad Daddy made choices that hurt our family, I said. But I'm not sad that I don't need his help anymore. Love doesn't require sacrificing your life's work. Love doesn't require sacrificing your life's work. 6 months later, I found ordinary days again. Tuesday mornings where the biggest decision was whether to read first or pull weeds. When the doorbell rang, it meant a delivery, not someone standing there with my checkbook in their mind. My house felt different. Same furniture, same rooms, but a stillness that hadn't existed during David's emergencies. After Bill filed the protection orders, I changed the locks. The first time the new deadbolt turned, it clicked with a satisfaction that surprised me, like something in the walls finally exhaled. The kitchen table where I'd signed papers I didn't understand now held library books, a mug of coffee, and bills I paid myself. My bank alerts came to my phone in plain language, and for once, the messages didn't make my stomach drop. Without David's demands, my budget stabilized. The mortgage-free house Robert left me was doing what it was always meant to do. Provide security, not subsidize my son. I rediscovered making decisions without asking permission. What to eat, when to schedule appointments, how to spend an afternoon. Small choices I hadn't realized I'd surrendered. Silence had texture now, not loneliness, autonomy. Sometimes I watched the curb where David used to park with his briefcase. It stayed empty. I didn't feel sadness. I felt space. Supervised visits with my grandchildren continued on terms that protected me. David followed the rules because he finally understood that boundaries weren't punishment. They were the price of access. And at night, when the house settled and the lights went out, I realized something simple and true. Silence can be the most beautiful sound. A year later, my bank called. Someone had tried to access my accounts using David's revoked power of attorney, like a thief checking whether the lock still held. I heard the automated fraud alert tone, then a calm voice from the fraud desk asking, "Can you confirm this request wasn't yours?" I didn't shake. I gave them my case number, repeated one sentence I'd practiced until it felt like steel. "He has no authority," and asked them to note the attempt in writing and keep the extra verification on my profile. When the call ended, I didn't feel fear. I felt proof. Because that Christmas morning wasn't the day I turned on my son. It was the day I stopped disappearing inside my own life. If you're listening and any part of this sounds familiar, don't brush it off. Protect your paperwork, protect your accounts, and tell someone you trust your deed belongs in your hands, not in anyone else's gift bag. Share this story in the comments or send it to someone who needs it.